Hi, my name is Paul Ténière. I'm CEO of Lafleur Minerals Incorporated. We're listed on the CSE here in Canada. I'm going to talk to you and with Matthew today about Lafleur Minerals and our projects in Quebec. So our main projects are the Swanson Gold Project in the Abitibi Gold Belt in near Val-d'Or. And we also have a gold mill we call the Beacon Gold Mill, which we acquired in late last year. And what we're hoping to do is become a near-term producer by mining at our Swanson Gold Project and then bringing that ore down to Beacon. And we're also looking at other deposits in the area as well to feed ore to that mill.
Paul, lovely to meet you. And it's the first time you guys have been on the show. So maybe let's kick off with understanding who you are, where you're from, what have you done prior to this?
Sure, yeah. I'm a geologist. I've been in business now for a little over 25 years. I've been working in various commodities, gold, base metals, worked in coal for some time as well. Internationally, both Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, a little bit in Europe as well. Have been involved in almost the entire mining cycle. So everything from grassroots exploration all the way through to mining production, both open pit and underground operations as well. So I've been very lucky to have that in my career. I've also had a fair bit of corporate finance experience, having previously worked at the Toronto Stock Exchange as their mining expert and also as a senior listings manager. So did that for several years and got exposed to the business side of the mining industry. So pretty broad background. I'm based in New Brunswick, but routinely travel to Quebec and other places across Canada to look at the sites and be involved in the technical aspects.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Paul, nice to meet you. As I said, let's get into this. You obviously got the Swanson Gold Project and also the Beacon Gold Mill. Let's start with the geology first. That's your area of expertise. So what have you got? How did you pick it up?
Yeah, so it's an interesting project, and it was back early in 2024. There was a bankruptcy proceedings for Monarch Mining, and as part of that, all their projects were basically up for grabs. So we initially put in a bid for the Swanson project, which was a smaller gold deposit, fairly advanced with about 200,000 ounces of gold. Was not a core project for them, but we started by putting a bid on that, which we were successful in. And then from there, we grew the project by doing option agreements with other companies in the vicinity to really expand that project into more of a regional project and looking at bringing various targets into that. So it started off at around a 6,000 hectare project, and with a mining lease to now it's over 180 square kilometers. And again, by collecting all the different properties within that general area. The project is very close to Val-d'Or, so it's only about a 20-30 minute drive to the southern part of the project. And so yeah, we've been focused on doing exploration and to really look at in depth across the entire project area. Traditionally, they've always kind of been looked at as small little deposits here and there by various companies. Instead, we really wanted to consolidate it and grow it from there. So we did everything from the grassroots exploration all the way up to very high resolution geophysics and then ground geophysics, and then looking at drilling targets. And now we're actually drilling on the project as well.
Okay, we'll come on to drilling targets and your own drilling program in a second. In terms of the data that you inherited from Monarch, I mean, what exactly, we got 200,000 ounces, I get it, but what other sort of drilling and data did you pick up?
So about, historically, the project's been worked on for close to 30 years. In fact, Agnico Eagle was actually working on the project back in 2009. This is prior to Monarch taking the project over. They actually did a scoping study and actually put a mine plan together for about 100,000 tons. That's how the mining lease came into the pictures. They actually applied for that with the Quebec government and were successful. So we've basically inherited all that data, as it was over 35,000 meters of drilling that had been done on the project. When we purchased the project, there had been about 10,000 meters done by Monarch before they went into bankruptcy. So, but that information had not been put into an updated resource estimate. So the first thing we did once we acquired the project was to update the resource where it is now. So our resource is essentially as of last fall. And it's at about combined to around 200,000 ounces, or indicated as somewhere 125,000 ounces, and that's mostly in an open pit mine shell. So we consider that the open pit part of the deposit. The inferred is mostly more on deeper and underground. So there was some deep drilling done, and it does continue. The resource does continue at depth. But there was a lot of very detailed drilling done at the surface.
Okay, and what are you seeing in terms of kind of lithostructural targets or I guess, structural orientations here? Because I'm interested in the targeting logic. You talk about 50 targets. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so it's a typical orogenic gold belt style. So, in what we see in the Abitibi greenstone belt, this is an interesting one. Normally, within the Abitibi in Quebec and Ontario, you're basically chasing what they call structural breaks, which are major structures that usually contain a significant amount of gold and base metals and other mineralization. And basically, Swanson sits on the northern structural break, north, about 50 to 60 kilometers north of Val-d'Or. It's kind of runs through. There's one that runs through the northern part of the project, and there's also one that runs to the south. The one to the north is where the Swanson deposit is mostly gold, a little bit of silver. The one to the south, which forms the southern part of the boundary of Swanson, is mostly as a mix. Actually, it's a little bit more polymetallic. So you'll see gold. You'll also see zinc, some copper, and even some lead. So it's a little bit more. Theory being that it's probably just a highly deformed VMS mineralization on top of the orogenic gold as well. So very lots of good alteration, quartz sericite. We get fouchite alteration, which is in the ultramafics, which is a very good indication of potential for gold mineralization. Swanson especially has that fouchite alteration, and that's essentially wherever we typically see fouchite alteration, we're typically going to see some of that gold mineralization come in, and that's as part of our drilling strategy. That's essentially what we're looking for. We see the fouchite, see the quartz sericite alteration, then that indicates that we're likely, and we also will pick up sulfides such as pyrite, and we'll find chalcopyrite in some cases as well, and a little bit less on arsenopyrite, but typically that's a good indication, and they provide as a pathfinder element as well for gold.
Okay, and in terms of the fouchite, which I guess ultramafics and the cyanide and the altered mafic volcanics, how are you sort of targeting mineralization, and how do grades vary in that?
Yeah, so typically the first thing we typically do is look at the geophysics, and so sometimes some of these units will be picked up by the geophysics. In this part of the Abitibi, there has been drilling on most of the major targets, some not. But when we say 50 targets, most of them are classified as mineral occurrences within the Quebec database. So they've had lots and lots of exploration over the years, but more sporadic exploration. So what we did is the first reason we did a full regional geophysics is to really look for these structures and whether they're being picked up, especially with the magnetics and the EM. And even the VLF, you can pick up some of these units, and really it's more just to trace them. So within these major structural breaks, you'll get other faults and folders that are basically offshooting within that structural break. And so you're looking at, and I don't say all of it, but most of them are sort of subvertical in orientation. They're not always in the same direction, like they're not always dipping in the same. There can be alterations in that depending on the complexity, the structural complexity. But generally speaking, you're picking these up. So then once we do that, we'll usually go back and follow up with prospecting and soil geochemistry surveys over those targets. And then from there, we look for those anomalies. And then we look at drill hole spacing. Sometimes we have done IP surveys over some of the areas just to really more fine tune it for where we're going to put our drill holes, so that we get a better understanding of the inclination of those drill holes and whether we're going to actually intersect that structure in the right angle.
Okay, and so just remind you probably said it in terms of the how you're modeling the kind of plunge direction. What do you say?
Yeah, so we're basically modeling so most of the holes will drill around 45 degrees, and we're trying to penetrate them perpendicular to the actual inclination and orientation of these structures. Like I said, they do vary, but generally speaking, most of these holes will not be vertical, but at angles. But we have to determine which angle to do that. And again, that's where the deeper IP helps, because then we're getting penetration deeper down, like 300 meters below the surface, so we're getting some idea. Whereas the airborne geophysics is mostly, we're seeing it mostly, like we will see at depths, but the refinement is through the ground geophysics. And so that's what we've done, and based on that information, we were able to put 4 major target areas within the project, which is the Swanson, Merrimack, Bartek, and Jolan targets. And if you look at our last news release or maybe one or two ago, you'll see it. We put that map together and we show where our drill holes are within that. And those are all systematically selected based on the information we've done over the last, like collected over the last it's almost 8 months now.
Okay, and you kind of outlined a kind of 5,000, 7,500 meter campaign across Swanson, Merrimack, Jolene, and Bartek. So how are you splitting that out?
Well, we're starting with Swanson first, and the rationale behind Swanson is that traditionally, especially recently with Monarch, they tended to focus on the deposit itself, and really we're just more doing infill drilling over the deposit, more just sort of getting it down to 12 to 25 meter spacing, which is great because that was able to get us into the indicated resource category because of the refinement of the drill holes. But what we're looking at is more what's happening to the east, mostly to the west actually, of along that structure. And so right now we're sort of 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers to the west along that structure, and we're drilling holes there. So it's more of a regional exploration drilling program as opposed to an infill, because we have a very good idea of the structure and the orientation of the Swanson deposit, but what we're trying to see is there extensions of that. A lot of times in orogenic gold belts, the high-grade gold deposits we call them ore shoots essentially, but they're essentially almost blobs of I'm really simplifying it, but basically blobs of mineralization, high-grade mineralization, and they kind of pinch in and pinch out along these major structures. So sometimes you're lucky, you get maybe a continuous one for several kilometers. Most of the time they're hundreds of meters in size, and then they pinch out. And then along the structure, maybe another 2 kilometers or even less, 500 meters, you'll see another, so we call them blowouts of mineralization. And so you're doing that along all these structures, and that's typically what you will see in these types of deposits.
And so how are you kind of refining this targeting, in terms of use of oriented core or structural modeling, etc.? Because as you go, you want to obviously learn, and you want to use that. So what's the process?
Yes, we do oriented cores, and that's very important. So we get an idea of the structures, because in these types of really complex gold belts, structure is everything, because it's all structure. Most of it is structurally controlled mineralization. So we need to get an understanding of what's happening with our folds, or whether they're microfolds or larger folds. Faults and fractures in the mineralization. And so we do oriented core, which is part of routine working in these sort of in the greenstone belts across Canada. So we'll take that. We'll take orientation measurements, like sort of inclination and azimuth down hole as well. Again, all that information. Then, as it's logged, of course, we're doing geotechnical logging, some at high level, but in some cases we could do very detailed. With the core being oriented, we're able to actually restructure the core, because as you know, in core barrels, the cores tend to roll around, and so by doing them as oriented cores, we're able to really recreate and essentially look at what the core and what the rock is like in situ down below the surface. And so that's the purpose of that.
And with this kind of these kind of downhole deviations, or possibility of downhole deviations, I mean, does that vary significantly between things like the altered ultramafics and other rock types that you're going to encounter?
Well, I can speak to Swanson. Generally, Swanson, the geology is fairly, for being in a structurally complex or gold belt, it is actually fairly, I don't want to say it's easy to understand. It's not as structurally deformed as you might see in other deposits, for example. So generally with Swanson, and again, we mostly know, the most information we have is on the deposit itself over the mining lease, but we know that there's about 8 general gold zones or mineralized zones within which there is gold. And they're subvertical, and if you look at our technical report and actually on our website, you'll actually see imagery of these zones. Now they go down to a certain depth and then they're sort of cut off, but really they're just cut off mostly because drilling hasn't penetrated deeper than that. What's interesting is they continue at depth, and the grades are fairly continuous across these zones. There are variations, but generally speaking, we're not seeing any major type folding within Swanson. We're seeing generally good subvertical zones, and the good news is most of this is not all hosted in quartz veins. So it's not narrow vein at Swanson. It's mostly held in the ultramafics. You'll see it in the altered zones, and that's great. So it's a little bit more of a disseminated within pyrite and some of these other sulfides. So it's not just hosted in quartz veins. Now there is quartz veining at Swanson, but it isn't like some other deposits to the south. The gold is mostly nuggety and held in within the quartz veins, and some of them can be thin, some of them are thicker, but generally speaking, the gold is within that. It's interesting because oftentimes you'll see visible gold, you'll see very coarse gold, but that is oftentimes more difficult to mine because of the nugget effect, essentially. In the case of Swanson, we're seeing a lot less of that. It's much more disseminated. It's what we call potentially bulk mineable. In other words, you can, whether it's a 30-meter wide interval, you'll be able to actually extract that and get a fairly good average grade for potential ore down the road.
Okay, let's talk. Maybe that's a good intro into the kind of bulk mining component before we kind of get back to the gold mill, the Beacon Gold Mill. I think you've talked about it in press releases and so forth. Bulk mining is something that you're thinking about in terms of things like, I guess, the permitting timeline and regulatory process for bulk tonnage at Swanson. What do you know?
So our plan is to start with a bulk sample at Swanson. So the good news is that because Agnico Eagle had applied for and was successful in acquiring a mining lease over the deposit, we've basically we skipped many steps on the permitting side. So it's essentially it was granted in, I think, 2009. And then every 10 years in Quebec, you have to provide an updated mine plan. So if the mine plan has changed, every 10 years you have to basically submit that to the Quebec government. They just want to know what you're doing on the lease, on the mining lease. Has anything changed? And then, sometimes the project can grow. As long as it's within that mining lease, is fine. We're due for that. So Monarch did not submit an updated mine plan at the time. So we're in the process of doing that. And we've done a high-level scoping study internally. We are also working towards the PEA. So the PEA is really just going to more fine-tune the potential mine designs and the other aspects of putting a project like this into production at some point. So based on that, we submit that to the Quebec government and waiting feedback for that. The only other thing we have to do is provide an environmental remediation and closure plan. So essentially, we're looking at starting off with a small bulk sample. It's close to anywhere from 80 to 100,000 tons, which is a fairly substantial amount. Shipping that material down to the Beacon Mill, which I know we're going to talk about. We're also looking at potentially we're going to do a trial on ore sorting, as ore sorting has become I'm sure you've heard about it and your audience has too. It's becoming more and more almost a best practice. And it isn't just necessarily to increase the grade of the ore, it's also to make things more efficient. So you're especially if you're having to haul a significant amount of material by truck or by rail to a mill, it's not on site. You want to reduce the amount of waste that you're actually carrying because of the cost involved. So we're looking at that, and then we're looking at a much larger operation as well. And again, we're working on a PEA to basically fine-tune that. But we would be looking at again, the size of the deposit is close to about 125,000 ounces in the indicated on the open pit side. So so there's...
Okay, let's ask a few questions because I want to make sure everyone understands. So let's say it's 100,000 tons. Is it 100,000 tons extracted or delivered to mill? What does the bulk sample actually measure?
Right, so essentially, and we don't have all the details yet because we're working through it, but basically with the ore sorting, if we go down that road, you're looking at reducing the amount of waste, as I said. So of that 100,000 tons, it just continues to go from there, and its process is crushed on site, then run through the ore sorter, and then trucked down to yeah.
So you think it could be 100,000 ton sorted?
Well, generally speaking, that depends on the recovery rates, right? So the ore sorting helps increase the recovery but then there's also the recovery rate at the mill as well. So what we're trying to aim for is trying to get something close to 5, on average around anywhere from 3 to 5 grams per ton. We're working out the details on the economics of that, but but generally speaking, especially with higher gold prices, it makes some of these smaller deposits much more economic than they were just several years ago. In fact, when we purchased the project, gold was at 1,800, and so that was one of the reasons that Swanson had never gone into production. It was because it was just considered too small at low gold prices. But when you get into higher gold prices, you're seeing a lot of these smaller deposits, that are sub 500,000 tons, that are becoming more viable because of the fact that they're much more economic with gold prices being the way they are.
Yeah, and so let's talk about, I guess, some of the balancing acts that you've got to do, right? So obviously you want to put as higher grade or through the mill as possible, but at the same time you've got to do things the right way in terms of getting a kind of representative bulk feed into the mill, testing different areas, etc. So I can see route number one gives you a lot more cash, especially to do the things that you want to do for the company in a less dilutory way. And the other is, well, maybe this kind of builds up a better picture of how we go about mining this thing into the future. It's a bit more representative. So maybe start with, again, just remind the ore body itself, it clearly, it's orogenic, so it's probably not homogeneous, but how will you go about ensuring a kind of representative bulk feed for the mill?
We have a very good idea of the geology, and we do have a three-dimensional model on the project. I don't think we're going to need additional drilling. I think that's the good news, because of the fact that Monarch had drilled to almost 12 and a half meter spacing between drill holes. That's pretty substantial. And based on our discussions with our independent geologists who modeled and produced the mineral resource estimate, I think we're in pretty good shape. And again, as we go deeper, we're only looking at doing this as an open pit, potential open pit. We're not looking at going underground. It's not saying that we couldn't go, but we would need to do additional drilling to really see at a much closer spacing to see whether or not we could go. We'd have to increase the drill spacing in order to have that confidence. But essentially, like I said, there's about 8 zones within it. Now, across the average, if you look at our mineral resource estimate, the average across that zone is about anywhere from 1.8 to 1.9 grams per ton. That's across that area. Within that are higher grade zones. And so we would target that. Now, this is all at surface, so it basically outcrops at surface and then goes down from there. So our bulk sample would essentially look at that sort of higher grade. I don't have the exact average grade at the moment, and hence why we're going to do the bulk sample, but we would target that. The purpose of that is really just to run it through the mill. We have a good indication that the mill, the flow sheet of the mill and its design will be able to process the ore at Swanson very well. In fact, Monarch was originally looking at potentially doing that and taking the material from Swanson and bringing it to Beacon. They were focused on their Beaufort mine. But we need to run the test to be sure. As the test is going through, we're obviously generating revenue and generating cash from the bulk sample. And then from there, we would then look at expanding the deposit for a larger operation that could last 3 years, for example. So that's the sequence of events. And so within that, the pit will essentially start with one. The pit will just continue to grow, and as we proceed. But the bulk sampling, basically, it's a metallurgical test to be sure.
Right. So in terms of, it's a metallurgical test between the oxide and the fresh, presumably.
It's all be all sulfides, and so
sulfides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's nothing from before. Okay. But because I always think it's kind of it's like to say that balancing act of trying to say, look, the big issue for small companies the past 2-3 years has been accessing capital and cheap capital at that, and this is, I think, quite a smart way of going about that. You said though that maybe this thing grows to another sort of 2 or 3 years. And what's the end game here? Does this thing how far can this thing grow, and what have you got to do to sort of try and understand that time frame?
Yeah, so we're working on the PEA now. So once we've complete the PEA, we'll be able, to discuss it publicly and see it. It'll be a lot more detailed than what we have now. We're working towards that now. So, we're more than halfway there, just in the sense that with the resource estimate recently being done, and also looking at things that even at a high level, we are working towards that. But we are looking at up to a 500,000 ton project is essentially for Swanson. And now that could, depending on what we discover, that could potentially grow. We are looking at it more outside of just Swanson though. So keep in mind that we are looking at other deposits like Bartek and Jolan, which had traditionally had historical resources on them, but they were done, 20, 25 years ago. They're not to the 43101 or CIM standards. That's why we're going to be drilling there this summer, is to basically do verification or definition drilling on those deposits, and also based on the work we've done for our geophysics and our exploration, we've seen that there's extensions to these deposits. And again, these were deposits that were sort of, there might have been 8 to 10, maybe 12 holes done, and then, they did hit some mineralization, but they didn't sort of look at it on a bigger spectrum. We're doing that, now we're looking at it on that sense. So it's still considered kind of regional because we are still looking at different, but the point is to try to bring these into at least inferred and continue to grow the overall size of the resource within the Swanson project. And our aim is to get over 1 million ounces within just the Swanson itself. There's also the opportunities to acquire other projects in the area. So as we start with Swanson, and we're generating revenue from Swanson, from whether it's a small 80 to 100,000 ton or growing, there's opportunities to continue to grow. We're even potentially looking at doing that even before we go back into production at Beacon. So there's lots of good projects in the area, lots of companies that have them but haven't been able to sort of monetize them or been able to acquire funding to do that. So there's lots of other opportunities around.
Okay. I feel we should talk about geotechnical and hydrological data collection at this point, but I think we're running out of time. So we'll come back to that another time. The model is one, it's in building a picture of, and we're going to talk about the mill now, but getting Swanson maybe up to 1 million, which, as you say, is a nice sort of starter project. It gets cash flowing and allows you to go and chase these kind of satellite opportunities of your own, your current assets, and maybe pick up some others along the way. We better talk about the mill then, if you don't mind. Can you sort of talk us about where you're, again, what exactly have you inherited, and what are the kind of critical path tasks left in terms of mechanical and electrical circuits, etc.? What have you got?
Yeah, so this kind of makes us a bit of a unique story because at the same time, roughly around the same time that we acquired Swanson, we had an opportunity to put a bid in on the mill, which was also up for grabs as part of we call it the CCAA, which is essentially part of the bankruptcy in Canada. And so we were successful in that, and we closed on that back in November of last year. Now the good news is that mill had been completely refurbished, and by Monarch, they had spent over $20 million Canadian to refurbish that mill. They were actually getting the mill refurbished at the same time that they were trying to get their Beaufort mine up and running as well. So Beaufort was not very far from Beacon. Beacon Mill itself and the tailings storage facility goes back to 1987. It was originally built just for the Beacon underground mine, which is now closed. So there is still an existing, closed underground mine on site. So they spent a lot of money to refurbish. That includes all electrical, mechanical. They got it back up and running, and they were running ore through Beacon from the Beaufort mine for several months before they closed down essentially. So and they were getting the Beaufort mine ramp. So there was ramp up going on at the mine as well as refurbishment and at the mill. So all this was collectively going on at the same time. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out. It was very difficult to sort of raise money to continue on the CapEx part of it, it was just a very difficult. Gold prices were also much lower than they were, so it's kind of a perfect storm, unfortunately, for them. But as a result, when we acquired the mill, it was in excellent shape. And so we recently had an engineering group come in and do a full valuation on it and looked at not only the mill but the tailings storage facility as well on site. And they concluded it was in excellent condition. And I've been to the mill in tailings storage facility it is. I've been to several mills in the past, some of them under care and maintenance, and when things are under care and maintenance, there's different levels of care and maintenance. And in this case, they essentially kept the mill in excellent shape because they thought that maybe at some point when they got out of CCAA, they would be able to get back into production and be able to get the mill restarted. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. But so they were really keen on making sure that the mill was kept in excellent condition. And so what we've done is in the past few months, we've sent a crew in to look at, okay, well, what's the cost to get it restarted? It's been closed it's not been running for about 18 months, almost a year. It'll be a year in January of next year, so close to 18 months now. And we put together a budget for that around $5 to $6 million. That includes work on the tailings storage facility, which is just minor repairs on that as well. The tailings storage facility is permitted to up to 1.8 million tons. It's basically sitting almost empty. It was barely used when it was originally built. The Beacon mine itself historically ran around late 80s into the early 90s. It stopped within a matter of a year or two. It started up again in the early 2000s and then quickly shut down. So essentially the tailings ponds are empty and ready for Swanson and any other projects that we bring into it.
Okay, so just so I understand how much money. So Monarch has spent a bit of money on that. It's been reasonably well maintained during care and maintenance. The tailings storage facility is ready to go, bar a little bit of work on that. Now, have you got the money to finish off what you need to do with this?
Yeah, so we're in the process of raising money now. So you'll see in our last news release we're doing an equity, and we have the opportunity for a debt. We're exploring that opportunity. We've engaged FMI to look into that possibility, but we are looking to do an equity raise now. That is conceivably help cover the majority of the cost for that. So that's what our main focus is now. We've got the budget, we've got the plan is to basically raise the money to do that.
And how do you feed the mill? How do you keep it busy?
It'll be busy through various means. So the main, of course, we're trying to get Swanson back up and running. We're hoping to do all that within a matter of months because, again, it's sitting on a mining lease. So permitting is, if it wasn't on a lease, the permitting would take several years just because of how long it takes this day and age. So there's that. We also have the opportunity to process bulk samples on from adjacent companies. They have basically large stockpiles that are ready to be sent to a small mill like Beacon. We process 750 tons per day. That's our nameplate. We can go up to about 1,000. So once we get up, we also have stockpile on site that was left over from Monarch. So it was about 5,000 to 7,000 tons there as well. And so we're going to use that material as part of the startup and recommissioning of the mill. We anticipate roughly 4 to 6 months to get the full ramp up completed and back into production. So we're aiming for sort of early 2026 to be back in full production. By that time, we'll be doing a large bulk sample at Swanson, and potentially, and again, it continues to grow from there.
Is there much competition in the region in terms of like mills with capacity? How do you compete?
We are targeting, so there's the large mill complexes, by some of all the mining producers. There are some companies that have done MOUs with some of those for processing some of their ore, or even doing bulk samples. It depends on the capacity. Some of them have actually ended up becoming firm commitments. Other times, not so much. We're really targeting sort of that mid-tier companies, right? The companies that are sort of sitting on 2, 3 million, 4 million ounce projects who, are looking at the numbers and going, well, it's going to take us 10 years to permit. It's going to cost us, hundreds of millions of dollars. So there are opportunities for custom milling at Beacon as well. So because the mill is in such great shape, there aren't really a lot. I mean, Apport has a mill, but they're focused on that for their own project. There really aren't a lot that are available in the Val-d'Or region that are capable of not only processing material from our own projects, but also from adjacent companies and adjacent projects. And so that's our part of our business plan is to really do that. And it's in many ways, I mean, we've had lots of companies ask us about it. and it's sort of the get it going and they will come. It essentially is that they want to see the mill back up and running. They say, hey, when are you going to get the mill back up and running? Because we'd be interested in potentially doing agreements with you for processing bulk samples or even custom milling.
And what does that look like, Paul? Say it's running at nameplate, right? If it's running at nameplate, and how do you charge? What are the margins? What do you think this thing turns over for you on your balance sheet each year?
Yeah, so we don't have exact numbers yet. Again, we haven't done an actual agreement yet, but usually it's sort of if you're doing a custom milling, a certain percentage of the revenue is basically comes to Lafleur because for processing that. It varies. It can be 3-4%. I mean, it really depends and varies. There's various ways you can do it. Certainly, there's a market for large bulk samples and even a bit of custom milling. But the key is that we're really focused, number one, on our own projects because that's the one we'll have the most control over to feed the mill. So the majority of the feed would be coming from our own projects. And again, potentially down the road, we acquire others as well. So yeah, it would be a mix. Like we are looking, we're putting together sort of internal models of how this will look, and it is a mix of dominantly from our own deposits, but also they're just because there is interest. I mean, there are other companies that are saying, just let us know when you're up and running, and we are interested in sending you material. So I suspect that we'll, again, because sometimes it can take a while to make deals with the majors, but we will have a fully up and running mill in no time, and so.
So you take a percentage of the direct shipped ore to site, 3 to 4% is roughly, well, there or thereabouts, right? At 150 ton per day. Okay, got it. Okay, people can go away and do some math with that.
Roughly 750. Now, there's also the opportunity to. We're not doing this now as part of our plan, but there is opportunity to expand the mill too. And so, in fact, previous Monarch had looked at potentially expanding it to much larger operation by adding another circuit, a CIL circuit, for example. And so there's that opportunity, and you already have the footprint there at the mill. So it's interesting because there's also that opportunity. So we're not looking at that.
To what? 150 to what? What would that go to? Could it go to?
Go, I mean, we don't have exact numbers, but you could go to 2,000, 5,000 tons per day. You could increase the size of it more than doubling the current capacity. So there's that opportunity as well. But right now we're fully permitted at the mill and fully permitted for 750 to 1,000 tons per day. And so.
Okay, sorry, I thought you said 150. So you've got 750 to 1,000 day potential.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
okay. Sorry,
day, yes.
I misheard you earlier. Okay, and that could double potentially. You've got the space required to be able to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Not construct. Okay. Same. I guess same with the tailings facility. You've got space if you need to expand.
Yeah, if we could, we don't need to expand now. So,
no, of course.
We're running at the current capacity. We're fully permitted to do so. So if you wanted to increase the size of the mill and increase the size of the project, there is opportunities potentially to grow the tailings storage facility. That would require a new permitting process to expand it. So now to say that, and we haven't approached that subject, but there are other projects nearby as well. So this is a sort of a brownfield area. It's certainly not greenfield.
Okay, got it. And you said you're doing an equity to raise potentially, but you're also looking at maybe debt. What are you talking? $5-6 million?
For debt, probably up to $5 million. For equity, anywhere from 5 or higher. 5 million or higher. So we're looking to try to do it just equity, but in saying that, there are opportunities to fast track. Then we could look at debt as a possibility. It would be favorable. It wouldn't be under. We're going to be very conservative on that, and they would have to be under favorable terms for sure.
Okay, and so what are the kind of barriers to actually restarting operations? You talked about permitting, obviously, First Nations, environmental, all that.
No. So there are no issues there. So it's mostly just more getting a team put together to basically do it. To be honest, most of the cost is the acquisition of spare parts for the mill. That's a significant cost to that. And one of the things about running a mill is you want to have an adequate supply of spare parts available, because it's a very if you've ever been in a mill, it's a very complex system with a very oftentimes a complex flow sheet. So, and you got lots of moving parts. And so one of the things is if a part's going to fail, it inevitably is going to. You want to be able to have those parts available. And one of the things we're really keen on doing is making sure that we don't take shortcuts. A lot of companies will, because they're in a mad rush to generating revenue. We want to make sure that the mill is up and running, fully functional, has that proper ramp up and recommissioning before going back into full production. That's why we're not looking at throwing major projects at it immediately, because with Swanson being an adequate size for what the mill can take at the beginning of after its recommissioning. So that's the reason we're taking a very pragmatic approach to restarting the mill, because as I said, oftentimes a lot of companies will take shortcuts, they'll rush, and then they're down for weeks on end because they didn't do the proper ramping up of the mill. So we're not going to repeat any of those mistakes.
Understood. And what about water? Obviously, sourcing, treatment, discharge, etc. How are you managing
comes
that?
from the tailings. So the tailings ponds. There's a tailings pond, and then there's what we call a polishing pond, which is essentially filtered somewhat, and so we actually pump water. The mill gets its water from the tailings pond.
Okay, fine.
Which is just adjacent to the mill. It's just several hundred meters away from the mill.
Right, and I'm assuming infrastructure, based given where you are, power, infrastructure, roads, all good. And
very close. It's just on the outskirts of Val-d'Or. Yeah.
So, and with the PA, you say that's due when?
We're hoping by the end of this year.
Okay.
We're working on, and I said we're very close. We're at least halfway there. One of the things one of the things we want to do is incorporate the results from our bulk sampling. We also want to do a trial on the ore sorting by using existing drill core from Swanson to begin the test, to look at which method would be the best option, which, if it's a laser, is it XRD, is it what type of ore sorting technology, and then it would just kind of grow from there. As we're taking our bulk sample, for example, we can grab more sample specifically for the ore sorting. The company that we select can then run it through their own equipment. And then we can look at, okay, well, what's the best equipment? Then we look at purchase versus renting when we go into a larger scale production. So it is becoming more and more common. Even high-grade gold deposits, they're Whetstone, for example, and Canna, and they're using ore sorting as part of their workflows now. Again, it's all about the efficiency, and everything in the mining industry is about efficiency.
It is. We saw. I think we had Karora Resource to come on and explain it. I think they ended up with 2 ore sorters in the end. It's definitely the way to go. Well, look, Paul, look, that's a really nice introduction to the company. I kind of like the kind of the desire to kind of get into revenue sooner rather than later.
Yes.
And self-finance the exploration and expansion and possibly acquisitions as well. So I appreciate you making your time, and we wish you luck. Stay in touch. Let us know how you get on.
Will do. I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks very much for the opportunity.